Mortal Kombat has been making parents, politicians, and censorship boards lose their minds for over 30 years. From characters so offensive they triggered Senate hearings, to designs so lazy their own creators publicly disowned them, this franchise has never stopped pushing buttons. Today, I'm breaking down every controversial character in Mortal Kombat history and exactly why they caused so much chaos. Starting with the original Sin himself. Kano has been ripping hearts out of chests since 1992, and he literally helped change the law doing it. Here's the thing. When Mortal Kombat hit arcades, 2 fatalities got singled out during congressional hearings on video game violence. Sub-Zero's spine rip was one, Kano's heart rip was the other. Those 2 finishing moves were directly cited as evidence that the gaming industry needed regulation, and the fallout from those hearings led to the creation of the ESRB rating system. Every age rating you've ever seen on a video game box exists in part because Kano shoved his fist through someone's ribcage in a pixelated arcade cabinet. But here's where it gets funny. Despite being iconic enough to trigger federal attention, Kano got benched from Mortal Kombat 2 and Mortal Kombat 4. Both times, fans were furious. The character was apparently too controversial to ignore, but easy enough to leave off the roster. And then Deadly Alliance in 2002 gave him a complete personality transplant. Suddenly, Kano speaks with an Australian accent, throws around Aussie slang, and leans into this charismatic criminal energy that somehow became his defining trait. A late-game identity change that had zero setup and absolutely no reason to work. But it did. Fans loved it. That's the tension with Kano. He's a violent, backstabbing mercenary whose signature move helped reshape an entire industry, and the community adores him for it. His controversy is historical, not ongoing. But if you think a Senate hearing is dramatic, wait until you see the character that made their own creators publicly disown them. Nightwolf. NetherRealm tried to fix this character twice. They arguably made it worse both times. Nightwolf debuted in Mortal Kombat 3 back in 1995, and his entire identity was Native American warrior. That's it. No tribe, no nation, no cultural specificity whatsoever. Just the greatest hits of Hollywood stereotypes. Shirtless, war paint, tomahawk, feathered headband. Every single visual cue pulled from decades of lazy media shorthand. But here's where it gets complicated. The 2011 reboot tried to course correct by assigning him a Lakota identity. Progress, right? Then MK11 scrapped that and placed him in a fictional tribe called the Matoka, while still using actual Lakota language. So now you've got a made-up people speaking a real people's words. That's not sensitivity. That's confusion wearing a mask. And his signature mechanic, sin eating, the thing that defines his entire character arc, it has zero basis in indigenous American spirituality. Zero. Sin eating is a Western European folk tradition. It just sounded exotic enough that nobody on the development team questioned it. His move list doesn't help either. A scalping brutality. An attack literally called native violence. A tomahawk chop that mimics the exact gesture indigenous communities have spent decades protesting at sports stadiums. Here's the thing. We know what good representation looks like because Killer Instinct's Thunder exists. That character was developed with actual tribal consultation, and the difference is night and day. Indigenous creators have produced detailed breakdowns cataloging every specific cultural violation in Nightwolf's design. The criticism isn't vague outrage. It's informed, documented, and devastating. But if you think mishandled representation is where the controversy peaks, wait until you see the character whose entire concept aged like milk left in the sun. Stryker. Let me set the scene for you. It's 1995, and Mortal Kombat 3 drops with a roster full of cyborg ninjas, thunder gods, and interdimensional sorcerers. And right in the middle of all of it stands Curtis Stryker, an NYPD officer. Just a regular cop with a gun and a nightstick, standing next to people who can literally reshape reality. It was a weird sell from the start, but nobody really cared because it was the 90s. And weird was the whole point. But here's where it gets complicated. In MK9, released in 2011, Stryker has a fatality where he pulls out his gun, looks directly at his opponent, and says police brutality coming up before executing them. In 2011, that landed as a dumb one-liner, a throwaway joke. Nobody blinked. After 2020, that exact same line reads like something from a protest sign, and suddenly the joke isn't funny anymore. Most people assumed NetherRealm would quietly retire the character, just let him fade into the background like dozens of other fighters who outlived their relevance. But they didn't. Stryker came back in MK1 as a cameo character in 2023. And here's the kicker. They redesigned him, removed the obvious police uniform, toned down the cop imagery, made him look more like a generic tactical fighter. But his moveset? Identical. Gun, taser, nightstick, lethal force without a second thought. They repainted the car, but left the engine completely untouched. He is functionally still doing police brutality, just dressed more ambiguously, so you don't immediately think about it. NetherRealm has never publicly addressed why they kept him. Zero explanation. No developer blog, no interview quote, nothing. And that silence says more than any redesign ever could, because it makes the whole thing look like a deliberate choice to sidestep the conversation rather than actually engage with it. The community is predictably split. Some fans see the subtle redesign as a reasonable evolution. Others call it cosmetic deflection that changes absolutely nothing substantive. And honestly, both sides have a point. But at least Stryker's controversy is about real-world optics. The next character on this list sparked outrage over something far more culturally sensitive: Shiva. Shiva has the rare honor of being controversial twice for two completely different reasons, in two completely different eras. She's a four-armed Shokan warrior introduced in Mortal Kombat 3, and for most of her existence, the debate around her was a slow burn. When NetherRealm redesigned her from MK9 through MK11, they swapped out her more alien, monstrous appearance for a humanized face model. Fans immediately split. One side called it desexualization, the other called it character cohesion. Standard internet discourse. Heated, but manageable. But then 2021 happened, and Shiva became something else entirely. Here's the thing. In MK11, her stomp move was genuinely oppressive, unblockable, difficult to punish, and absolutely dominant in competitive play. In April 2021, a female streamer was repeatedly stomped during tournament play and visibly broke down crying on camera. The clip went viral overnight. Within weeks, NetherRealm issued a balance patch, and not a small one. They slapped a 61-frame recovery increase on the stomp, removed duck frames entirely, and reduced Shiva's health from 1,000 to 950. For a studio that typically takes months to adjust balance, this was lightning speed. And that's where the real controversy started. The community fractured completely. One camp argued that NetherRealm caved to emotional manipulation, that a crying streamer shouldn't dictate competitive balance. The other camp pointed out that the stomp was genuinely broken and the patch was overdue regardless of the catalyst. Whatever side you fall on, the timeline speaks for itself. Viral emotional moment, rapid developer response, significant mechanical changes. It's one of the clearest documented cases in fighting game history where a single stream moment demonstrably accelerated a balance decision. But if you think a crying streamer causing a game patch is wild, wait until you hear about the character whose fans were so toxic they became a whole separate controversy. Fujin. Fujin is a literal god, not a powerful warrior, not a sorcerer with delusions of grandeur, an actual deity whose one job, his entire reason for existing in the Mortal Kombat universe, is protecting Earthrealm. He debuted in MK4 back in 1997, and the game made a big deal about it. Wind God, Raiden's brother, Earthrealm's divine protector, cool. Then Deadly Alliance came out in 2002, and Earthrealm was under direct, active, existential threat. Shinnok had just tried to destroy everything. The Deadly Alliance was forming, and Fujin, gone. Not captured, not depowered, not written out with some clever excuse. Just gone. No mention, no explanation. The god whose entire job description was protect this specific realm apparently had somewhere better to be. He popped up briefly in Deception in 2004 as a cameo, and returned as a playable fighter in Armageddon in 2006. But neither game gave him any real narrative weight. He was there technically, but technically present isn't exactly what you'd expect from a divine guardian during multiple apocalyptic events. Then he vanished again. From 2006 to his MK11 DLC return in 2020, that's 14 years on the bench, while Shao Kahn and Kronika both took their shots at destroying reality. The designated protector of Earthrealm was missing for over a decade of existential threats. Zero divine intervention. Ed Boon essentially admitted that Fujin simply wasn't popular enough to justify a bigger role, which is honest, sure. But it's also admitting that popularity metrics overruled basic story logic. You created a guardian god, told the audience he exists to protect Earth, and then benched him because not enough people picked him in versus mode. His MK11 version quietly acknowledges that he's been away without ever actually explaining where he was or why. The game just moves forward, leaving this enormous plot hole baked directly into canon. Some fans argue the long bench actually helped him, because at least he couldn't accumulate more forgettable appearances. That's the nicest thing anyone can say. His absence preserved what little goodwill existed. But if you think a missing god is a storytelling problem, wait until you meet a villain who retroactively broke the entire timeline she was never part of. Most characters on this list are controversial because fans are divided. Some love them, some hate them. Shu Hao doesn't have that problem. Everybody hates Shu Hao, including the people who made him. He debuted in Deadly Alliance in 2002 as a Mongolian Red Dragon operative with a cybernetic heart implant strapped to his chest. If that sounds familiar, it's because Kano had been rocking the exact same gimmick for a decade already. So right out of the gate, the character's signature design element was somebody else's signature design element. Not a great start. His storyline was somehow even worse. He infiltrated the Special Forces, planted a bomb that destroyed the Outer World Investigation Agency's portal technology, and then immediately got killed by Jax in the same game. That's peak new character energy right there. One massive destructive act followed by instant irrelevance. But here's where it gets funny. In 2009, Ed Boon himself tweeted that while he didn't hate any MK characters, he was never a big fan of Shu Hao. That screenshot has been circulating for 15 years and counting. Game Informer later confirmed Shu Hao was one of Boon's least favorite characters, and designer John Vogel reportedly declared Shu Hao's death in Deadly Alliance canon specifically because he wanted to permanently remove the character from existence. It didn't stick. Armageddon brought him back in 2006 just to kill him again in the opening cinematic, and then in MKX, his severed head shows up as a prop being carried by a background character. The developers literally turned their own creation into a trophy. The community received it as a victory lap, and honestly, it was. He's ranked at or near the bottom of every worst MK character list on every major platform for over 20 years straight. That kind of sustained, universal hatred is genuinely rare in any franchise. But if you think being despised by your own creators is bad, wait until you see what happens when a villain fails at a cosmic level. Mocap. This might be the funniest character in Mortal Kombat history, and the best part is that nobody meant for it to be funny. Mocap appeared in Deadly Alliance in 2002 as a secret unlockable character, and he was meant to be a tribute. A genuine, heartfelt tribute to Carlos Pacina, the real-life motion capture actor whose physical performances helped bring MK's fighters to life since the original arcade days. The name itself is literally motion capture with the C swapped for a K, because of course it is. Mortal Kombat's letter-swapping tradition is so deeply embedded in the franchise's DNA that even their tributes follow the naming convention. It's a joke about itself, and it doesn't even realize it. But here's the thing. The team added Mocap so late in Deadly Alliance's development cycle that they forgot to give him a fatality. Let that sink in. A finishing move, the one mechanic that defines Mortal Kombat as a franchise. The thing the entire series is built around. Gone. Just not there. He also received no unique weapon style and no original fighting techniques, meaning their tribute to the man who literally animated MK's roster is a character who cannot fight in any distinctive way. It gets better. In Deception's Conquest mode, Mocap shows up as a lost soul, wandering around asking players for help, which is an unintentionally perfect metaphor for a character who exists but has absolutely zero purpose. His final playable appearance came in Armageddon in 2006, which was basically a roster graveyard where every character NetherRealm didn't know what to do with got dumped into one game. And the debate around Mocap is genuinely interesting when you think about it. Does honoring someone require making them a playable fighter? And if you do make them playable, Is a broken, fatality-less secret character actually an honor? Or is it accidentally the most disrespectful tribute in gaming history? You almost can't be mad at mocap. He's too absurd. He's a fourth wall-breaking accident that somehow became a permanent part of Mortal Kombat lore. But absurd or not, he's got nothing on our next entry when it comes to characters the developers actively wanted to erase from existence. Meet. Every franchise has a bottom. Not a controversial bottom or a broken bottom, just a character who exists so close to nothing that you almost respect it. For Mortal Kombat, that character is Meat. Meat first showed up in MK4 back in 1997, and calling him a character is being generous. He was a hidden skin variant, a skinless humanoid with exposed muscles, visible organs, and an eyeball dangling from his head like a Christmas ornament nobody wanted. He wasn't designed. He wasn't planned. He was a visual gag buried in the code that somehow escaped containment. But here's where it gets funny. Years later, the developers decided Meat needed a backstory, so they gave him one. A failed experiment from Shang Tsung's Flesh Pits. Which sounds cool until you realize the entire community views that as a desperate attempt to justify a design that had zero reason to exist in the first place. It's like writing a biography for a doodle you drew during a meeting. Then came Armageddon in 2006, the game that said everyone gets in, and I mean everyone. Meat was elevated to full playable character status in the same roster that also brought back mocap. Let that sink in. Two of the worst characters in franchise history, sharing a game, standing side by side in the select screen. That's not a roster. That's a support group. And his harakiri, his self-fatality, he holds in gas until he literally explodes. That's the finishing move. Either that's the most on-brand thing ever created for a skinless meat man, or a developer communicating exactly how they felt about the character through game mechanics. Honestly, it might be both. Here's the thing about Meat though. He's not offensive, he's not broken. He has no competitive player base, no meaningful story presence, and no mechanical identity whatsoever. He occupies a roster slot that could have gone to literally any legacy character with an actual history. Even his defenders, the people who argue he works as absurdist humor, struggle to name a single specific redeeming quality beyond the concept itself. He's controversial, not because he's too much of anything. He's controversial because he's nothing at all. But if Meat represents the absolute bottom of the barrel, at least he got there honestly. The next character on our list clawed their way to infamy through something far more calculated. Mileena. Mileena has one of the strangest character arcs in fighting game history. Not because of what happens to her in the games, but because of what happened to her outside of them. She debuted in Mortal Kombat 2 back in 1993 as a palette swap of Kitana. The concept was simple. She's a clone with a horrifying Tarkatan mouth full of razor teeth, and she hides that face behind revealing outfits and seductive behavior. Sexuality as a mask for monstrosity. It was a decent character hook for 1993. The problem is the franchise kept revisiting that exact same hook for 30 years without ever questioning whether it still worked. MK9 in 2011 made it worse. Way worse. Mileena was written with a childlike personality, innocent, naive, almost playful in the way she spoke and acted, but they kept her in one of the most revealing outfits in the entire game, a childlike mind in a hypersexualized body. Critics flagged it immediately as one of the most uncomfortable characterizations in the franchise, and honestly, it's hard to argue with them. Then came MKX in 2015, and here's where it gets really interesting. Mileena received a redesign that gave her more human-looking lips, softening her signature monstrous appearance. Shortly after, killed off early in the story. The community noticed that timeline instantly, changed the look, removed the character. Fans called it a cosmetic death sentence, but her absence created something nobody at NetherRealm expected. Fan demand for Mileena's return didn't just grow, it became aggressive, relentless. Developers later disputed whether it crossed into actual harassment, but the sheer volume was undeniable. It became a documented PR issue for the studio. Every roster reveal, every character announcement, the response was the same. Where is Mileena? And the pressure worked. She returned as DLC in MK11 Ultimate in 2020, and she came back different. Not just visually, but narratively. Her return included a confirmed romantic subplot with Tanya, representing the franchise's most explicit LGBTQ+ storyline to date. It was a direct response to years of fan advocacy, but the reception was complicated. Some in the LGBTQ+ community welcomed the representation as meaningful and long overdue. Others viewed the confirmation as an afterthought, something used to soften criticism of how the character had been handled for decades. Neither group was entirely wrong. Here's the thing. Mileena's story is one of the clearest examples in fighting game history of fan behavior directly determining a character's inclusion. NetherRealm essentially confirmed this by addressing the fan response in interviews. Whether you call it passionate advocacy or something uglier, the result was the same. The fans demanded her back, and they got her. Just not exactly the version anyone expected. But if Mileena's controversy is about a character the fans love too much, the next one is about a character that literally nobody loved, not even the people who made him. Kronika. Every character on this list failed in a specific way. Bad design, bad timing, bad cultural awareness, bad balance. Kronika failed in every way simultaneously, and she did it at the worst possible moment. She was introduced in Mortal Kombat 11 as the main antagonist and final boss, not just any villain, the most powerful being in the entire franchise. A cosmic titan who could manipulate the flow of time itself, rewrite reality, erase anyone from existence with a thought. She was supposed to be the ultimate threat, the culmination of over 25 years of Mortal Kombat storytelling. Here's the problem. She didn't exist for any of those years. 0 appearances, 0 mentions, 0 foreshadowing. Then suddenly, MK11 asks you to accept that this all-controlling entity had been pulling strings behind every major event in the franchise through retroactive flashbacks shoved into the first 3 games. The most powerful character in MK history was apparently just invisible for over 2 decades, and her design reflects exactly how rushed she feels. Everything about Kronika radiates designed by committee energy that critics immediately identified. She looks generic, she sounds generic, she radiates absolutely nothing. For a character meant to be the franchise's ultimate cosmic threat, she has less visual identity than half the roster. But the boss fight is where it gets truly painful. You cannot throw her. You cannot use fatal blows. Many of her attacks deal unavoidable chip damage. This isn't difficulty. This is restriction disguised as challenge. Players weren't losing because Kronika was clever or intimidating. They were losing because the game literally removed their tools. That's not a final boss. That's a punishment. Then, the Aftermath DLC dropped in 2020 and somehow made everything worse. It revealed that Shang Tsung, a villain who has been interesting since 1992, had been scheming for his own power the entire time, ultimately betraying everyone and seizing Kronika's hourglass for himself. The supreme cosmic titan who controls time itself got completely outmaneuvered by a sorcerer she should be able to erase from existence. The franchise's ultimate threat reduced to a stepping stone for a man with actual personality, and her in-story decisions match that incompetence perfectly. She turns her back on known dangerous opponents. She wastes resources in ways that contradict her established omniscience. The most powerful character in franchise history routinely makes the worst decisions of anyone in the cast. The community response was unanimous. Across Reddit, GameFAQs, and every fighting game forum, Kronika is rated the weakest villain in Mortal Kombat's roster. Not despite being the most powerful, because of it. Korean gaming Wikinamu Wiki went further and labeled her the worst character in video game history. That's what Kronika represents. Not a cultural misstep. Not a balance disaster. A narrative void at the center of the franchise's biggest moment. Over 25 years of Mortal Kombat building toward a climax, and the character at the center of it generated no menace, no personality, and not a single memorable moment. The worst character in video game history. And honestly, it's hard to argue. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.